Three real cases. Three ordinary nights that turned into something none of us could explain. And some people who study clusters of strange disappearances and violent encounters think they fit patterns they call missing 411. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm not saying anything definitive. I'm telling you exactly what I saw, what happened to people I know, and why, years later, those details still don't make sense to me. I grew up in places where the line between backyard safety and the deep dark was thin. I'm the one who tells these stories because I lived them, because I saw the tracks, heard the footsteps, and watched people I love stitch their lives back together after they were cut. Listen closely. These are not headlines or theories dressed up to scare you. They're memory. If you want this channel to keep putting cases like this on the map, consider subscribing. But first, hear the first one. We were kids, bored on a late summer night. Me and Alex, both 16, too awake to sleep and too restless to stay home. The town was that kind of place where everyone knew the edges of everyone else's life, who worked where, who slept on which bench behind the old gas station, who kept to themselves. Jerry was a fixture, a man who'd been homeless for a while, sleeping in a clump of tents and tarps down by the river near the old rail bridge. He was harmless, as far as teenage logic could tell us. He'd wave from his fire, maybe hand out a soda, tell you a cracked joke. You don't go into someone else's camp to mess with them. You go because you're curious and cheap entertainment at midnight. We walked down the gravel path that led to the clearing, boots scuffing the stones. The night had that thick, humid hush that presses on your ears. Crickets, the distant thrum of a highway, and the occasional clink of metal from the encampment. A ring of firelight held the tents like a stage. Jerry sat alone on a log, a cigarette glowing between fingers that shook like somebody else's music. He nodded when he saw us. We waved, the way you wave to someone you're only half invested in seeing. And then, just past the circle of light, I saw it. A silhouette. Tall, too tall for any man I knew. Not hunched, not slouched, upright, rigid, like a coat rack planted in the dark. It stood maybe 20 yards out, between the trees and the broken fence that ran along the river. No glow, no reflection from the fire on its face, just a cutout of darkness. My first thought was someone playing a joke. My second was more practical. Get out, quietly. We weren't meant to be there. My feet were already moving backward when Alex hissed, "Do you see that?" We backed away slow, breath held, trying to keep the firelight between us and that shape. Gravel cracked under our shoes. The silhouette didn't move. It watched. I watched it watch us, and I realized I could hear nothing from it. No rustle of clothing, no branch snap, no step. It was like someone had draped silence over the thing. The path to the road narrowed by a sagging bridge. We ducked low, assuming distance would keep us safe. Then, without warning, it moved. It closed the space between us in a way that was not gradual. It lunged forward, not walking but surging, an explosive burst that tore the night. It didn't run like a person running, silent, fast, all forward motion. The sound of our own breathing roared in my ears. We ran. Our feet barely connected with the gravel before we were sprinting. Alex screamed, a short, raw sound. The darkness behind us became a pressure pushing the world forward. I don't think I've run that fast since. The bridge loomed. The boards shook beneath us. Behind us, something hit the approach to the bridge, a thud or a slide, and then the night swallowed the noise like it had never happened. We reached the road and didn't stop until we were in the halo of a street lamp, lungs burning, legs trembling. We looked back. There was nothing. No shape, no camp, no footprints leading away. It was as if whatever it had been had never set foot on that gravel. Jerry poked his head out, squinting, and then sighed when he saw us. He offered us a soda like nothing had nearly plunged us into whatever had just come out of the trees. We threw the cans away and went home. I lay awake all night, eyes open to the dark, replaying how it had stood and then shot forward like a piece of the night itself. The rational part of me built lists of possibilities. Someone with a flashlight angled away from the fire, a draped coat hung on a post, a misperception fueled by fear and cheap beer. But the details that stick are precise and odd. The posture, the total lack of sound, the speed of the move. Some of the people who study clusters of unexplained disappearances and odd encounters, those online forums and independent researchers you've probably seen linked in comment threads, point out similar traits in other accounts. Silent observers, sudden explosive movement, no tracks left behind. Could these traits be coincidence? Of course. Could they be something else? Some think so. That image of the silhouette never left us. For weeks we avoided that stretch of river, then the whole side of town. We never went back to Jerry's camp. He packed up months later. I don't know where he went. People laughed at us now and then, the teenage horror story you tell at parties. But when it's you running and your heart is in your throat, it doesn't feel like a story. It feels like a question you can't answer. If you want the channel to keep sharing cases like this, consider subscribing. There's more, and we should keep asking. The second night I tell you about is different. There's no silhouette outside a firelight. There's a house, a simple subdivided street, and a sound on a cordless phone that changed how a lot of us looked at our neighbors for a long time. It was senior year. I was driving up the long lane when my phone rang. Ryan's name on the screen, but the voice that pulled it out of him was not his. It was choked with panic. "They're at Mrs. Klein's," he said. "Police, you have to come." I thought it was one of those accidents kids get into. Someone took a fall, someone fainted, so I sped the rest of the way. The cul-de-sac was swarming with lights, cruisers, their lights strobed blue and red in a way that makes your stomach drop. Neighbors stood on their lawns in sweatpants, their faces white under harsh floodlights, whispering. Mrs. Klein's house was a single story, with a porch swing and a garden gnome. Now the front door was cracked open, like an invitation you didn't want. There were smears on the top of the doorframe and on the inner side of the casing. Not the huge cinematic gore you imagine, nothing like that, just a distortion of something human. A trail of dark, a slashed top window where someone had pushed their way in or tried to climb, and heavy marks on the frame showing the force of an attempt. Ryan's mom had him inside. She sat with him on the couch, hands wrapped around a blanket so tight she hadn't looked at me yet. Mrs. Klein was on the floor of Ryan's entryway, wrapped in his jacket, small and shaking. She'd gotten out of her house after being attacked on her porch, and she'd stumbled straight into Ryan's arms. The weirdest thing about seeing it with my own eyes was how small the scene made everything. A once ordinary evening, interrupted by violence that didn't make sense. The front steps were scuffed, like someone had been dragged. There were scuff marks on the porch rail. A heavy implement, a bracket, a club, something blunt, had been used. Whoever did it hit hard enough to injure, not just scare. But when the witnesses described leaving and police questioned people, a detail kept surfacing that didn't fit the normal pattern of a panicked flee. Neighbors, and later my classmates, described the attacker as moving oddly afterward, not fleeing in a ragged sprint, not stumbling away in fear. Several people who glimpsed a figure moving away from the scene said the person walked calmly, with a measured posture, like someone finishing a task and then leaving. No flight, no desperate running, no crying. Just measured steps into the trees. The police processed the scene, taped off the yard, took measurements, photographed the door and the top window. They searched for prints, looked for DNA where they could. They asked the classic questions: motive, enemies, financial disputes. None of them landed. Mrs. Klein had known enemies. She kept to herself. There were no cameras on the block that caught a clear face. People said they saw a shadow moving on the path adjacent to the cul-de-sac. Video from a neighbor's doorbell showed only grain that could be anything. Gloves? Possibly. A mask? Maybe. For a long while, the case sat on the shelf. What unnerved me and others was that the violence felt deliberate and precise, but the perpetrator didn't behave like most criminals who panic and run. If you commit a violent crime, panic is common, a rush to get out, to hide. But this person's calmness felt like cold intent. For weeks after, folks walked their dogs with their keys in their fists. Mrs. Klein packed up and moved away within months. The family that lived across the street installed new lighting and a ring of cameras they checked obsessively. Some researchers who collect stories of odd disappearances and violent encounters have noted aggressive behavior, sometimes accompanied by calm, controlled movement, as an unsettling pattern in certain files. They point out that this level of composed violence, someone able to strike, then simply walk off, contradicts the usual fight-or-flight choreography. It's a factual detail. A witness described calm steps away. What it means is another matter. Could it mean a human attacker who's practiced and cold? Certainly. Could it be something stranger, an explanation outside the usual categories, as some online communities suggest? It might. The word I keep returning to is unsettling. The investigation was thorough in the way small-town investigations are, earnest, patchy, and limited by resources. Detectives interviewed neighbors, took statements, ran background checks. Nothing conclusive. The case stayed in files, a stain on our memory of how safe our cul-de-sacs felt. Years later, when I tell people about that night, they ask why I remember a calm gate so vividly. I remember because I saw the door, and because I held Mrs. Klein's trembling hand as she tried to tell us what happened and kept stopping because trauma rewired how she reached for words. She didn't describe monsters. She described being hit and then seeing someone walk away like they had finished a chore. That ordinary detail, the stride of the person who did it, lodged in all of us like a splinter. Do patterns like that line up with the kinds of files discussed by those who study Missing 411? In some threads, yes. In others, no. The point is the same. Sometimes behavior at a crime scene doesn't match what we expect. And sometimes, when details don't add up, people look for patterns. The third case is the one that lingers in my family's house, like a picture you can't take down. It begins with a small, ordinary moment. A neighbor's son offering to take my older brothers camping. We were a rural family. Offers like that weren't unheard of. People around here borrowed tools, babysat, invited kids to the lake. But my mother had a feeling, not a thought, not a rehearsed worry, just a hair on the back of the neck kind of thing. She said no. She didn't explain much. She didn't have to. Our family didn't argue with her when she said it. Weeks later, the newspaper bone-chilled the town. 3 people found dead near a stretch of woods that had always been a place for kids to build forts and push limits. It was a triple homicide that made our small region shake. The initial investigation was messy, because small-town policing sometimes is. Few resources, stretched detectives, a rush to get answers. The neighbor's son, the one who'd made the camping offer, became a person of interest. He wasn't arrested immediately. He left town. Years passed. He resurfaced on a TV screen in another state. Arrested after an attempted abduction and assault. Charged there for an act that, by definition, makes him the kind of person you won't want in your life. My mother got a call. Off the record, a detective voice that doesn't have the formalities you'd hope for. "We think he did it," they said quietly. No charges filed in the old case. No public announcement. Just the way some people in law enforcement pass along their gut. It's not the same as proof. It's not the same as a conviction. But it's a thing that sits in the room between you and sleep. The near miss part is what haunts us. If my mother had said yes, if my brothers had gone, it's a small contingency calculus that lives in the same household as survivor's guilt. Gratitude and horror braided together. I think about how ordinary he seemed when he was there, talking about camping gear, pulling his sleeves up like anybody else. He fit in the neighborhood. That's what made it harder to connect the later crimes to him. People who look at patterns in violent behavior sometimes point out that those who commit certain violent acts can blend in for a long time. Seeming normal is not an innocence certificate. Some commentators who examine missing 411-related files note that ordinary people have been implicated in strange disappearances and crimes, raising the question, are we sometimes living next to danger without recognizing it? I'll say this plainly. The neighbor's son was later arrested elsewhere for an attempted abduction. That arrest is a recorded fact. That detectives told my mother, off the record, they believed he was responsible for the old murders is something my mother was told and she told me. Investigations didn't produce a formal confession or a public conviction for that specific triple homicide. So legally and ethically, I will not say he was proven guilty of that earlier crime. But the pattern of an outwardly ordinary person later involved in violent acts is a real thing. It's one of the reasons communities are left with the same unbearable question. How much of danger is apparent, and how much hides behind a neighborly smile? Those three stories, the silhouette that watched then lunged, the calm attacker who walked away, and the near miss with a neighbor who later became a confirmed offender elsewhere, thread into a single fabric of disquiet. Each has its own particularity. Each ends with a gap. No explanation, no neat closure. That gap is where people start to fill in possibilities. Some of those possibilities are straightforward and human. Sociopathy, predation, opportunistic violence. Some of them are not. They drift toward the margins where online researchers have placed the missing 411 files. Patterns that sometimes highlight silence, strange movement, inexplicable presence, or the disappearance of people in places where common sense would have said they were safe. I want to be careful here. What follows is cautious, not declarative. When I mention missing 411, I'm referring to a collection of cases and a framework popularized by investigative writers and online communities who chart clusters of strange disappearances and odd encounters, often in wild places. It is not a law, nor is it a scientific consensus. It is a lens. Some researchers who use that lens notice traits like silent observation, sudden bursts of movement, victims found in baffling locations, or the involvement of people who seemed ordinary. When you put my three stories next to those descriptions, there are hooks that catch. The silhouette's silence and speed, the deliberate, calm attacker, the neighbor's outward normalcy followed by violent behavior. Do these hooks prove anything? No. They're points of alignment that some will use to suggest a larger pattern. They might be coincidences. They might be something else entirely. My job here is to tell you what happened and why some people say it looks like more than it is. There's a human cost at the center of each file that can't be abstracted away. The camp encounter left two kids who still flinch at the sound of gravel. The assault on Mrs. Klein left a woman who moved away and stitched her life together elsewhere, but not without the tremor of what happened. My mother keeps a small, secret gratitude for the sixth sense that turned away an offer that could have ended differently. These are not fodder for internet theories. They are lives. In the months after the silhouette at the camp, Alex and I learned to name things that had once been nameless. We learned to move differently in the dark, to test silence for answers. We never found tracks that explained what we'd seen. That silent sprint still bothers me when I think about how quickly a landscape can change from safe to threatening. In a missing 411-leaning conversation, that's one of the signature images you might hear, the sudden movement, the unaccountable speed. The implication, always tentatively phrased, is that something fought by different rules than a human might. But again, that's interpretation layered over observation. I can only give you the observation. Mrs. Klein's attack changed the neighborhood. People replaced porch lights with brighter ones and bought security hardware they'd ignore until something else happened. The police closed the official book on the case as unsolved, but the memory of the calm step haunted witness statements and private conversations. People still ask, quietly, why someone would strike and then walk away like they had a bus to catch. Could it be an efficiently violent person? Yes. Could it be something outside the usual categories? Some internet researchers think so. The facts in my telling are the same. The meaning is what people have argued about for years. And the neighbor's son, his arc from friendly peer to a person arrested for a violent crime elsewhere, exposes another pattern, the ordinary face that hides something dangerous. That, more than anything, is the lesson that sits with my mother like a rock in her pocket. She told me years later, hands in her apron pocket, that she had a feeling and followed it. It's better to be judged for caution than to live with something else, she said. Her caution may have saved us. It might not have saved the people who were killed that day in the woods. That split between the what-ifs you're grateful for and the what-ifs you mourn is heavy. Researchers who study missing 411 cases often talk about certain clusters of characteristics, locations where people vanish without clear reason, strange behaviors observed by witnesses, and, occasionally, connections between disappearances and people later implicated in violent crimes. Again, these are theories and frameworks, tools used to try to make sense of things that otherwise shred a neat narrative. For the 3 stories I've told, it's tempting to reach for a single explanation that covers them all. Maybe there is one, maybe there isn't. The safer, truer statement is this: all 3 stories share a quality of unresolvedness. They all leave us with a sense that ordinary life is brittle. We live under the assumption that our neighborhoods have predictable rules. Dogs bark, cars drive by, people lock their doors and sleep. These events take that script and tear pages from it. The silhouette was silent when silence was expected to be filled. The attacker was calm where panic is common. The neighbor's son was ordinary until he was not. When patterns like that repeat in different places and times, people, myself included at certain late hours, start letting their minds spin to possibilities that sit just outside normal explanation. Let me close with what I think matters most. First, empathy for the people touched by these events. Saying that something could align with missing 411 patterns does not erase the victim's pain, and it should never minimize the investigative work law enforcement does. Second, uncertainty is not glorified here. I don't want to entertain sensational explanations for the sake of clicks. I'm telling you precise memories and the emotional fallout those memories produced. Third, curiosity is natural. When comforting categories fail, we look for new ones. Some choose a cryptid or creature hypothesis. Others point to human depravity. Both impulses respond to the same need, to map the unknown so it stops feeling so big. If there's one image that won't leave me, it's a silhouette, rigid and watching. Then suddenly all motion, the way a porch looked after a violent calm had passed through. My mother's face when she tells me how she told her sons not to go. Those images are material. They anchor the speculation that others attach to them. They are why people will read a case file and then whisper, "Missing 411." They're also why friends and family still wake up in the night with a question on their tongue. What do you think? Are these 3 accounts the work of people you can explain, something criminal and human? Or do they point to something we don't yet have words for? I'm not asking to convince you of a monster. I'm asking you to sit with the uncertainty. Comment below with stories you've lived or heard, respectfully, please. If you want more cases like this, subscribe and ring the bell. Tell us what you believe in and why. We'll keep digging, carefully, and we'll keep telling these stories for the people whose lives were touched by them, whether the explanations end up being human, horrific, or something we haven't named yet.